Not like they're competing against all these bachelor degree level students.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Visa Vibes podcast. I'm Emily Newman, managing partner of Reddy Newman Brown PC here in Houston, Texas. We help companies, entrepreneurs, professionals with the ever-changing process of U.S. immigration.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Stephen Brown here. I'm also a partner with Reddy Newman Brown, and today we're going to kind of talk about something that's been around. We've talked about it in our last few topics, but a specific variation of the F1 visa, STEM optional practical training, not just the initial optional practical training, but the STEM OPT and the compliance around it, because there is a lot more rules when we talk about STEM OPT and we're seeing an increase in site visits and, not enforcement, but investigations, if you will, into it. So we kind of figured good topic.
Yeah, especially with everything going on with student visas and the CVIS records and all of those litigation processes. So we want to make sure people understand what the compliance requirements are for STEM OPT. But before we do that, let's talk about kind of the background of how we got the STEM OPT to begin with, because it wasn't always there. It was actually created in 2008 by regulation, and it was initially a 17-month extension of optional practical training. So when F1 students graduate, they have the opportunity to apply for a 1-year work permit called optional practical training. Problem was at that time, around 2008, we are running out of H-1B visas very quickly. There's a lottery going on. Students who were graduating in STEM fields and had jobs with top employers needing STEM degreed individuals were not able to transition from OPT to H-1B within the 1-year period. So Department of Homeland Security issued a regulation saying we are going to give them STEM OPT extension only for STEM degrees for an additional 17 months to basically bridge the gap till the following lottery for H-1B so that they could potentially more easily transition and companies would not lose out on these people.
Yeah, and keep getting the hands-on training that they're getting, instead of having to, hey, we're going to bring you in fresh, brand new employee. You're getting that hands-on practical training.
Yeah, and so it was only available for companies that use the E-Verify program, which is still around today. E-Verify is kind of like an electronic version of the I-9 form. So if you've ever applied to a job and started a new job, one of the first documents that you fill out in onboarding, and this goes for anyone within the United States, is to fill out the I-9 form. You have to prove that you are allowed to work in the country and that you are who you say you are. So they'll ask for a picture ID, or social security card, birth certificate, but for foreign nationals, it might be an EAD card or something like that. That's kind of the first part of the I-9. Everybody has to do it, but some companies choose to go an extra level and use the E-Verify program, which takes that exact same I-9 information and runs it through the DHS database and the Social Security database to confirm that the documents that the employees provided are correct and that they are actually authorized to work. It happens most of the time within seconds. It's got its flaws, it's got its pros and cons. Companies definitely need to think about whether they want to use it. But for those companies that do use E-Verify, they have the opportunity to hire STEM OPT extension employees. But then, we had this in 2008 is when it started. And in 2015, due to a court ruling, it was actually eliminated. The court said that the 2008 rule was not following proper notice and comment procedure because they kind of did it as an interim final rule due to emergency situation. So the court said you've got to go through the proper procedure. So they did that. And then when they did that in 2016, they replaced the 17-month extension with a 24-month extension. They also added additional compliance requirements. So there are new teeth to this. So you still have to have the qualifying degree in the STEM field. And you have to file a 765 application while your initial OPT is still valid. The company still has to be an E-Verify company. There are still opponents to the rule. There were more lawsuits filed. I think they're finally done. I can't remember.
I think the last one is done.
So basically, other people argue that it allows employers to hire foreigners at a lower cost because they F1 students generally don't pay FICA taxes, so there's a little bit of tax savings there. But they did add a wage requirement. It's not exactly a prevailing wage, but people are saying that, there's no prevailing wage requirement, so we can use this for cheap foreign labor and that sort of thing, and that it can cause companies to choose a foreign worker over an American worker, but there are safeguards in place to hopefully avoid that.
Yeah, and something I think to always keep in mind, the vast majority of F1 students, and not all, but the vast majority are coming here for their master's degree or their PhD. There are some, especially as we talk about like age out H4s that are getting their bachelor's, but the vast majority are master's degree and higher. So it's not like they're competing about against all these bachelor degree level students. It's much higher level. So, when we get into the compliance, there's really two sides of this coin. Employers have certain rules, and students have certain rules. And so, when you're an F1 student, uh, there's a lot of rules that you have to follow. One, something we've been arguing in court, you have to have a STEVIS record. That's you would think that's a no-brainer, but that's part of the issue going on with the SEBIS issues right now. You have to have a SEBIS issue record because the recommendation is made through SEBIS where the school says, hey, we've reviewed certain things that we're going to talk about. We're going to recommend it, and then you apply for the I-765. One of those documents the school reviews is your I-983 training plan. This is a document with the employer and the student come together and say, here are the goals of this training opportunity. Here's how we're going to monitor them. Here's how we're going to provide feedback. Basically, how are we going to conduct training? All right, that we, for this. What's the supervision? How does this relate back to the field? What are we going to do? That's done between the employer and the employee, the student, and then reviewed by the school. And the school says, yep, we're going to recommend STEM OPT, and then you go forward. You also have to provide validation reports to your DSO every 6 months, your designated school official, to confirm your ongoing employment and your compliance. You have to notify the school DSO within 10 days of any material change. So, job title, job duties, changes in your supervisor, worksite address, salary, so they can update the system. If you are laid off, you have to provide updates to the schools because you're only allowed a certain amount of time. It's 150 days for the STEM OPT. It's 90 for the initial OPT, and then up to 150 for the cumulative 3 years. And then you also have to do self evaluations of the 12 and 24 months. So the schools are monitoring to ensure, because again, this is designed to further your education with hands on practical training.
All right. So those are all of the things that the employees have to do. What about the employers? They have their own compliance requirements, right?
Yeah, and this is something that I think not gets lost, but employers think, hey, I don't have to sponsor. It's not like an H-1B where I have to put in the petition, but they have certain rules too. Emily mentioned it. They have to be an E-Verify company. Something I've seen is to make sure the company is actually E-Verify, participates in E-Verify. Some companies were at some point and either stopped using it or their record in that company, with that company got terminated in E-Verify, and they aren't now an E-Verify company. So I always tell both companies and the students to double check it. You could go look on the E-Verify database. You can't get the number on the database, public facing side, but you can confirm they're in good standing with E-Verify. Um, and the school has to have a policy on how they're going to use it. Excuse me, the company has to have a policy on how they're going to use E-Verify. It can't just be Emily's on OPT. We're going to E-Verify her. What is kind of how we're going to handle similarly situated employees. The companies also have to implement the training plan. You're going to sign off saying, we're going to do this, 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 and this. You actually have to do what you said and keep records of that, because we'll talk about that later on why. But you do have to actually do what you're saying. You can't displace, U.S. workers with an F1 student. They can supplement, but you can't just say, I'm going to fire this U.S. worker over here to hire a student. No. And then the employer also has to notify the school within 5 days if they terminate or if the employee resigns. So it's not just, hey, we're going to sign off on the training plan and we're good, go do whatever. There are an active participant in it. Even though it's not sponsorship, employers do have a role in it.
Yeah, and they do also have to offer commensurate salary
Yeah.
to what they would to U.S. workers. So if they were to hire an intern who happens to be a U.S. worker for that job and offer them X amount of dollars, they need to offer that same amount to the foreign worker. And then in terms of benefits, health insurance, vacation time, all of that has to be similar to what a U.S. worker could get to avoid that issue of, you know, displacing US workers to hire foreign workers because they're less expensive or because they don't have to offer as many benefits.
Yeah, so, not only all this is there, they got to take an active role. Who uses this? What companies?
Yeah, so we don't have any recent data, but 2019 was the first time that the government actually put out a list of the top 200 employers using OPT and STEM OPT students. And this was put out by ICE. And so a lot of what's on the list makes sense. So, number one company back then was Amazon, Google, and then you have this AZ Technologies, Deloitte, Microsoft, Intel, Integra Technologies, Facebook, Apple, Walmart.
Now, two of those companies aren't like the others.
Right, exactly. We've all heard of the 8 other ones. They're definitely hiring a lot of tech workers. Makes a lot of sense that they're hiring a lot of these people. But in June of 2020, after this report came out, students that were previously associated with AZ Technologies and Integra Technologies started receiving emails from the consulate saying that their visas had been revoked. So that was, and we started hearing about that and wondering what's going on. And they don't say why they're revoked. They don't mention these companies. It just, after several times of hearing these same stories and the same company names coming up, we started to put two and two together that maybe there's something going on with these companies. They both were listing the same address in Wilmington, Delaware, which turns out to be basically a strip mall, not a place where
With let's see, AZ Technologies had 1,057 OPT. Integra had 721 in a strip mall.
yeah, exactly. So that makes a lot of sense. So eventually we had investigations going on, and it turns out that these two companies were actually charging students for employment letters and training plans, basically so the students wouldn't exceed the 150 days of unemployment and fall out of status. So you have desperate students like aren't able to get a job, maybe they had one and lost it or whatever the case may be. That 150-day clock is ticking, and then in comes AZ Technologies to the rescue, Integra Technologies saying, hey, we'll give you a letter that you can give to your school confirming you're employed with us. We'll sign the 983 training plan for you. The unemployment clock stops ticking and you'll continue your F1 status. Well, yeah, that sounds great, except that they didn't actually have any training to provide. They weren't employing these students, and they were charging the students money
Yeah,
for these letters.
we both talked to a lot of these students, and I think one of the things that struck me early on is, we all kind of had our theories on what was going on, and I know plenty of students I spoke with said, I got a call from a recruiter. I had, open to work on my LinkedIn. Got a call and they said, look, we'll get you on board. You can meet our kind of what we need. We just need you to pay for these training modules. And so I talked to plenty of students who said, great, like this sounds okay. Maybe that's the way it works with some companies, I guess. And then they never received the training and they're like, this is weird, and left. But others kind of got sucked in.
Yeah, and so these students were expecting to get some sort of assignment to do, some kind of work to do. Some of them stayed there for months waiting, and
Mhm.
we saw emails of them constantly reaching out to
Right.
the people at these companies and never getting any response, or just saying, just sit tight, we'll find you something. And so most of the time they ended up leaving those companies. But it then became a problem for those students if they left the country to apply for a visa at the consulate, because the consulates were now aware of these companies. So if you have it listed in your employment history, that's a red flag. And so sometimes students had trouble getting back into the country, had trouble changing status to H-1B and those other things. So it definitely was opened people's eyes as to who's using this and whether there's actual enforcement going on.
And there was. I mean, these folks have had issues since 2019, 2020 with changes of status, visas, ports of entry, anything. They've had tons of issues. So, what is the mechanism? Not only do we have all the normal administrative enforcement mechanisms, we have, those notices of intent to deny, notices of intent to revoke, consular issues, and all that. Uh, ICE does and routinely does site visits. In fact, this isn't just a Trump enforcement thing. We'll talk about that in a minute. I did two a couple years ago. Under the Biden administration, where we represented companies because they really weren't sure what to expect. In both of these, so DHS does these site visits. They're designed to confirm, hey, you said you were going to do these things in your 983. What's really going on? Let's see for face to face and make sure this is legitimate. And talk to the company and talk to the employee. And so, what I've gathered from this, and it's kind of interesting because when I met with a client in just outside of Austin and out in California, I asked the ICE officers, "You guys local?" Like, no, we flew in from SEVP, and then they kind of tour a region, if you will, and they go through that region. So they get these letters saying, "Hey, we're going to come check out, make sure." People are available, right? Because especially with work from home, you don't want to show up at an office and no one's there. But they do come in. It's SEVP, the Student Exchange Visitor Program, and the officer is going to talk to the employee, to the supervisor, maybe the HR representative that signed the training plan or whoever did, and they want to know what's going on. How is payment done? Is everything kind of above board? What's the nature of the work? What do you have a work product you could show? How do you conduct your training? And these companies that I've worked with can articulate like, yeah, week one we're going to do this, week two we're going to do this, then we're going to get them some hands-on, and then we have feedback meetings. We're available, whatever. And then they want to tour the facility, and even though they're not announced well in advance where it's you can create a bunch of stuff. So I do think companies need to prepare, and we'll talk about why in a minute. But these do happen. It is in their authority to do this, and they want to make sure what you said was real.
Yeah, we're definitely hearing more about them coming up. We're getting more requests from employers saying, hey, I got a letter from ICE saying they want to do the site visit, check on our STEM OPTs. What do we need to do? So we're hearing about that more and more. So I think it's going to continue and
I think
probably
so.
increase just because we are in the Trump administration. So, from an employer side, what documentation should you maintain to be in compliance and be ready and ready to go for these site visits? Number one, we would recommend keeping a copy of any I-983 training plan that was signed and submitted to a school, so that you have it to refer back to and say, well, what did we say? Because some of these site visits may happen a year or more after you've hired this person. The
Right.
person may even be gone by now. But they do look at kind of all the STEM OPT employees who've hired, not just particular ones that are on payroll now. So you'll want to have a copy of that. Definitely keep your normal payroll records, because you do need to be ready to document that this student's pay was commensurate with what U.S. workers would receive. Those evaluations, training reports, progress reports. So if you said in your training plan that we are going to conduct weekly one-on-one meetings and we're going to do performance reviews every quarter and X, Y, and Z, you should have documented that you've actually done X, Y, and Z, so that you can show that you're actually in compliance with the training plan. And whoever is supervising the student, whoever's providing that training, they should be available. They should have, again, emails, things to show that they have actually been supervising, been providing that training, any kind of onboarding documents to show the work location, what job title they were hired under. And then because these site visits, yes, you do get advance notice, but not like tons of
Yeah, not like
time.
months and
Yeah,
weeks.
just a couple of days usually. You want to be able to provide all of that in very short notice.
And I don't think it's wrong, Emily, to have multiple people available. I manage employees, but I don't do HR side of things. So I wouldn't have a problem, if a company like our firm had an audit saying, hey, I could talk about how we do our training, like the hands-on training, and HR could talk about payroll. And I think that's fair. You don't want to have me talking about payroll because I know what day it's done, and that's about the extent of it. You want the right people talking to these FDNS or not, excuse me, the SEDP officers, and they're okay with that. They understand nobody's doing one thing at most businesses. So what we wanted this topic because we want to have topics that are topical, timely and topical topics. And we're seeing more of this under Trump 2.0. What's Trump 2.0's big thing? Enforcement and making sure everybody's doing things the right way. And especially ICE is going to be looking at this. We're seeing it with student visa issues with SEVIS. And we're starting to see an uptick on these STEM OPT compliance to ensure that they're doing things the right way. And so they want to see how is the supervision occurring, and we're keep that documentation. If you do, hey, maybe Emily's down the road and I'm here. Maybe we do a Zoom. Keep those logs available. Sometimes it's hey, we're on site here. Track all this that you're doing. Maybe keep a log almost like of what training you do. I want people to treat this as seriously as you do your I-9s, as well as your H-1B compliance, your LCA compliance. This is serious. And, they can take action to say, we're not going to let you sponsor on STEM OPT. And so keep that in mind. Or, maybe you're not doing it right for employee A, and it could jeopardize how they view employees B through Z. And so just keep this in mind that what you do impacts everybody, and they track this holistically.
Yeah, and I think it's important to again point out that these site visits are done by ICE. It's not like a H-1B site visit that is done by FDNS. FDNS is the Fraud Detection National Security Directorate that falls under USCIS, which is a benefits granting agency. ICE is a compliance and enforcement agency. ICE is the one detaining people.
Right.
ICE is the one removing people. So it's definitely important to take this not more seriously, but as seriously as all other types of compliance, even though you don't hear about it as much and it hasn't happened as much in the past. I do think it is on the horizon that we're going to see more of this and potentially more enforcement actions happening for companies that aren't complying.
Yeah, and we talked about this. So much of immigration is designed to protect U.S. workers, and especially under the Trump administration. So when we talk about the payment and all that, the salaries and all that, I want to make sure you're not just meeting the narrative. And truthfully, most companies are doing things the right way. Unfortunately, there are bad actors out there that spoil the whole bunch. You think about these AZ Tech and Integra, and they have cast a shadow on Amazon's use, of Facebook's use, and trickled out. So do take it seriously in general.
Yeah, and so STEM OPT does offer a vital bridge for students, especially those looking to get into the H-1B. Nowadays, people have to go through the lottery 2, 3 times, and so even 3 years isn't enough for some people. But it's very important that employers and the students treat it as a formal training program, not any kind of loophole to get out of paying taxes or reduce wages and that sort of thing.
And it's, own your immigration journey. I know you've got to work with employers and all this, but do things from your end to make sure you're staying in compliance. And if you shouldn't be paying for training. I'm sorry, that shouldn't be a thing that you do. And if you feel like something, hey, this sounds weird, talk to an immigration attorney. I mean, we've got pretty good eyes and ears on what's going on, what's sketchy, what's not, what sounds okay, what isn't, and make sure you're making sure you're staying out of the hot box here as well.
Yeah, and there are ways, obviously consulting with an attorney can be expensive for a student,
Of course.
but there are ways to get free information. We do have a weekly YouTube that streams where we answer questions live. We also have a daily Zoom call where you can just join in and get your questions answered there. So that way you can stay fully documented, fully compliant, and continue your immigration journey.
You mentioned the Zoom. Rahul Reddy, our founding partner, was the one who started identifying these issues.
Yeah,
And it came through the Zoom.
that's right.
And he said, okay, I'm hearing these names. And then more people, he wrote an article, and then more people were like, I worked with AZ Tech. I'm seeing this. I worked with Wireclass, Integra, whatever. I mean, that came through our network that we got based off of this. So, again, if you feel like something's weird, bring it up and we can start doing our digging because we've got our tools as well.
All right. Thanks for joining Visa Vibes.